Welcome, friends, once again to our session on the miracle of America. And as you know, this is lesson number 7, and it's called the baptism of fire. And that's just the way the founding fathers felt about it, and that's the way the states did too before they were through. So you'll see why in just a moment. As you know, Constitution Day is September the 17th, commemorating that great day on the 17th of September, 1776, when the Founding Fathers signed this great Charter of Liberty, and then Washington attached a personal letter to it, and they sent it to Congress. Now, when it arrived in Congress, there were a number of members of Congress who were at the convention. In fact, had been released from Congress temporarily so that they could discuss the Constitution with the members of Congress. Madison was one of these, and as the father of the Constitution, he was able to explain to the total satisfaction of the majority that it was ready to go to the states in its present form. They only had it for about 8 days, and then they sent it out to the states. Now, each state was invited by the Congress to call a convention, a special convention for the purpose of examining the Constitution and hopefully ratifying it. Now, the state legislature could have the people do it, or they could appoint somebody to go to these conventions to study the Constitution out. And now, Roman numeral 1. The new Constitution immediately created a general state of alarm among the people. A general state of alarm. Now, they had a chance to study it quite soon. As a matter of fact, it hadn't been finished 2 days before the typesetters at the Philadelphia paper there, the Pennsylvania Packet, had put it all together in type, had taken all of their news stories and abandoned them, and published the whole text of the Constitution. And other prominent papers published the whole text as soon as they could get a hold of it. So under A, your blank is 2. Now, the initial wave of reaction and resentment was not a surprise to the Founding Fathers. That's what they say in their writings. This did not come as a surprise. Now, that was a surprise to me. I thought they would expect everybody to just acclaim them for their great accomplishment. No. They said, after all, the public was expecting a whole series of amendments to the Articles of Confederation, and that's your blank. They thought there were going to be just some amendments that they could study, 4 or 5. They didn't expect a whole new form of government. What's this new 3-headed monster you've foisted off on us? One of them said. And they knew that, after all, it took them a total of 4 months, and that's your blank, of debating, arguing, and finally digesting the major points to their satisfaction. So it wasn't surprising to them when the public first got a hold of it that they would say, well, no. That's what they'd said among themselves for a long time, till they'd talked it out, and reached consensus. All right? That's number 4. Capital C. There were 3 delegates, you'll remember, to the convention that wouldn't sign the Constitution. So the opponents, you know what they would do? They immediately went to those 3 men and said, what was your objection? And George Mason of Virginia, he was very articulate about his objections. He really was a great man. He had written the Virginia Bill of Rights, and that was his first main objection. You are trusting a central government to administer its affairs without having a Bill of Rights and a declaration of the inalienable rights of man set down so that they have guidelines that they cannot violate. And so, Bill of Rights, no Bill of Rights, he said. And then, secondly, he said that we've set up the president too powerful. He would be way too powerful under this form of government, way too powerful. And you've got authority in that man. He's head of the armed services. I mean, he's the commander-in-chief. And you've got him nominating all the principal people and making all of these arrangements with foreign countries. Way too powerful. And they said, and the vice president, what's that for? That's an unnecessary appendage, just wasting money, just an unnecessary expense. I don't know how vice presidents would feel about that now, but anyway, that's what they said. And number 4, you didn't even provide in this, we don't even have a council. We don't even have a council to advise the president. Now you've got to have a council. Even the king has a council or a cabinet. None was provided for. And it isn't in the Constitution. Never was put in there. But it said the president can require reports from his officers. And so that turns out to be the cabinet. That's the only basis for it, really. And then 5, the federal judiciary is definitely a threat to local courts. They're just going to move in and usurp all the authority of the local courts. So it's a threat. Well, those who favored the Constitution became known as Federalists, meaning a federal government, a strong central government. That's Federalists. Federalists. All right, those who were opposed to it were called Anti-Federalists, meaning we want all the power to remain primarily in the states. We want strong states' rights and a weak central government. So you got the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Capital E, the cause of the Federalists was greatly assisted by statements coming in from Thomas Jefferson, our U.S. ambassador or minister to France, and John Adams, our U.S. administrator over in England. Jefferson and Adams. Jefferson's and Adams. All right. Now, Jefferson said, listen to his statement. He got a copy of the Constitution. Here's what he said. The example of changing a constitution by assembling wise men of the state instead of assembling armies, the way they did in Europe, will be worth as much to the world as former examples, mainly our Declaration of Independence that we've given them. We've been giving examples to the world that any nation can follow to get its freedom and independence. Now, notice what the Declaration of Independence does. They didn't really have to write that. All they needed to say was, send a letter to the king and say, this is it. We're through. We're on our own, and we've got a militia to prove it. They didn't do that. They carefully structured the Declaration of Independence, you'll remember, justifying what they were doing in principle and precept so that other nations could justify themselves also. So that was a great example, Jefferson is saying. Now he says this Constitution is unquestionably the wisest ever yet presented to men. Now that's Jefferson talking. All right, now John Adams comes along. John Adams. And you'll notice what he says. John Adams wrote, the greatest single effort of national deliberation the world has ever seen. Boy, he was proud of what they'd accomplished. That's the greatest single effort of national deliberation the world has ever seen. Well, these men had so much prestige because they'd written very fine, what shall we say, exploratory papers on good constitutional government. They were loved and respected by the people. Well, at least respected. John Adams is an interesting little fellow. He had kind of a prickly personality. And he says, I am a great believer in the divine science of politics. And good government, he says, is a divine science for the happiness of the people. And he said, I know what to do, and he said, I'm going to make myself very unpopular in doing it. But I just got to hammer on the heads of all of the founders until they accept these principles, because they're sound and they're eternal. And they're not going to give me any credit for it. He said, I'm going to go down as a very unpopular person. Nobody's going to write any operas about me. And there'll be no poems or orations or accolades when I die. And sure enough, 100 years after John Adams was dead, there wasn't a statue for John Adams either in Washington or Massachusetts. But then the scholars got to digging in and saying, who thought up all these good ideas? Well, Sam Adams, cousin of John, the two of them had made tremendous contributions in the thinking of the people. And so people began to give John Adams, kind of aggressive little fellow that he was, a lot of credit. There's no doubt about it. And in one of his letters, he says, Franklin was the last one to agree with me. So there's a lot of story there that we probably don't have yet. All right, now the furious debates during the ratification conventions accomplished several good things. First of all, it created so much controversy, everybody got to arguing about it, that thousands felt compelled to study it. Isn't that the way it goes? You've got to get a real controversy going before some people pay enough attention to look and see what it really said. And so study is your blank. And as a result of the study, they began to understand it. And that's really what saved the Constitution. They got away from the emotional tide of having Aunt Mamie or Uncle Joe say that it was terrible, and got right down and saying, well, when you stop to think about it, that's what we needed during the Revolutionary War. Wish we'd had it. All right. Furthermore, the opposition revealed a number of very significant weaknesses that it really had. That's weaknesses. And when it appeared that the Constitution would be rejected in several states, particularly because it lacked a Bill of Rights, the sponsors of the Constitution let the word pass among all the states, look, why don't you ratify it and add any amendments that you think we ought to have? So capital C is bill, and then go to D and see what they did by way of amendments. They turned in 189 amendments they wanted to have adopted by the first session of Congress, then sent to the states for ratification. Now, in the first session of Congress, Madison, who did so much work on the Constitution, was great. He took all 189 and he boiled them down to 12. 12 great amendments. And then those were ratified by the Congress and sent to the states. But the states turned down 2. And one of them we had to later put in the 14th Amendment. Although the other one was it shouldn't have been approved anyway. But one, Madison was disappointed. He said that would have been a good one, and we later put it in the 14th Amendment. All right? Now, capital E. One of the greatest things to grow out of the ratification debates were the Federalist Papers. Now, this little booklet, you can get it in paperback. We always have quite a few of them back on the book table. That is the effort of Hamilton, Madison, and Jay to convince the New York delegation to approve the Constitution. It was obvious New York was going to turn it down. It looked like for a while Maryland would, and they knew Rhode Island would. That's Rhode Island, you know, they were definitely going to turn it down. But Hamilton got these two great men together. Now, John Jay later became our first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And then Hamilton, of course, he'd been an aide to Washington. He was one of the foremost political leaders there, but the governor was against him, and a lot of the Tories were against him. Anyway, they wrote in the newspapers all the reasons why each phrase of the Constitution was reasonable and sound and morally right. Now, that's why the Federalist Papers are so precious, because it's a Bible commentary, so to speak, on the Constitution. And in the back, you'll find a copy of the Constitution, and in the margin, the page number where the founders discussed that particular point. So this is a great publication. Now, I just have this little suggestion to make to you. When you read the Federalist Papers, read them out loud. The Founding Fathers had a style of writing and reading and listening much more profound than ours today. They frequently would have one sentence paragraph long, quadruple sentences, so to speak, all tied together, and parenthetical provisions. If you read it out loud with the appropriate commas and pauses, it's beautiful. You have to read it sort of like Webster's orations. You don't get the full impact if you don't read it out loud. That's my suggestion to you. It's a brilliant little book. All right, now, Roman numeral 3, Article 7 of the Constitution provided that only 9 of the states here had to adopt the Constitution in order to have it put into operation. 9. Okay, so that's your blank. Now, here's what happened. It went out, they studied it, they debated it, and then several of the states tried to rush to be the first. And Pennsylvania thought they were going to make it, but they got to quarreling, and so they weren't first. It was Delaware, and they adopted it. You see, December the 6th, just a short time, about 3 or 4 months after the convention, and the vote was unanimous. Unanimous. And Pennsylvania then came along 6 days later, on December the 12th, And the votes were 46 to 23. But the debate and the venom that went into that ratification conference was so terrible, so intense, that when the Federalists went out to celebrate with a big bonfire celebration afterwards, the Anti-Federalists broke through to James Wilson, who had defended it, knocked him down and started to beat him with clubs. And if an old soldier hadn't thrown his body against James Wilson, he would have been beaten to death. I want to tell you, feelings were running high. James Wilson is your blank there. Now, New Jersey ratified next, and it was unanimous. Excuse me. Then Connecticut came along. Georgia was unanimous too, by the way. Now we're over to January 2nd. Then Connecticut ratified 128 to 40. And Massachusetts, oh, that was rugged. Sam Adams was very unhappy with the Constitution until he was assured there would be a Bill of Rights and several other things. Then he switched over, pulled Governor John Hancock with him, and they were able to finally pass it. But look at this, 187 to 168. Now that's a spread of 19 votes. That means that if 10 had gone the other way, Massachusetts would have refused to come into the Union. All right, Maryland was 63 to 11. Now we're getting up to April of 1788. South Carolina came in with a good vote of 149 to 73. And New Hampshire was the ninth state. Everybody was watching to see what happened, and she came in 57 to 46. 57 to 46, a switch of 6 votes, and New Hampshire wouldn't have come in. Then Virginia fought that back and forth. Patrick Henry was against it, but Randolph wouldn't sign the original Constitution. He now came in favor of the Constitution. That was tremendous. He said, no, with amendments, I'll fight for it. So he did. And it finally passed 87 to 79. 87 to 79. A swing of 4 votes would have kept Virginia out of the Union. How do you like that? And New York was one of the most bitter battles of all. It was Alexander Hamilton's good work and some influence by the Federalist papers in the news articles. It finally swung over 30 to 27 for New York. A switch of 2 votes would have meant defeat. Isn't that something? Now North Carolina, she met together and they battled it back and forth, and finally they just had to go home. They just couldn't come to any kind of agreement for various reasons. So then they called a second convention, and they finally got going, and the final vote was 194 to 77. So now the Constitution got into operation, and presidents were elected, the Congress was functioning. Everybody waited for Rhode Island. They're not going to do anything about it. They're happy. They're an independent, sovereign nation. Let everybody go their way, and the other states got so disgusted with them, guess what they did? They prepared to send ambassadors to Rhode Island, and Congress was going to cut Rhode Island off from all commercial enterprises, that is, relations. If you want to be a foreign country, well, treat her as a foreign country. That's what they decided. So finally they got together and they worked it out. But look what the vote was, 34 to 32. That's capital M. 34 to 32. A single vote would have changed the outcome. Well, the United States Constitution was put into operation as follows. When Congress had adjourned in November of 1788, there was no central government in operation until the new president and Congress were elected early in the year. Now, the electors were chosen by the states January the 7th, 1789. In some states, the people actually met and elected the electors. Other times, the state legislatures did it. So people is B. Now, capital C, each elector would vote for 2 persons. Going to vote for 2 persons. Why was that? Because the Constitution originally provided that you'd vote for 2 people, and whoever got the most votes is president, and the next one is vice president. Now, you'd think that'd be a pretty good idea, until they found out that usually the number 1 man would be all right, but the number 2 man would be his political enemy. That's what happened here very shortly. When Adams became president, his vice president was the man that was on the other side, just sitting around waiting for him to die or something. Almost needed food taster under those circumstances. All right, now capital D. On April the 1st, the House of Representatives was organized with 30 of the 59 representatives there, which was a quorum. That was enough to do business, right? 30 of the 59. 59 is your blank. And on April the 6th, the Senate was organized, but there were only 9 out of the 22. At the time they were organized, there were only 11 states that had ratified, so that would give them 22 senators, 2 senators. Only 9 were there. And April the 6th, which is that same day, a joint session of the House and the Senate opened up the Electoral College votes, and Washington had 69 votes, and the other votes were spread among a lot of people, so John Adams received 34, making him the vice president, and he served very faithfully as vice president under Washington, later became president himself, you'll remember. Now, the Constitution said you have to keep a record and publish it, so April the 15th, the Gazette, or Annals of Congress began to be published. Now, at our Freeman Institute, somebody missed those figures, 69 and 34? All right. At our Freeman Institute, we have a set of the original annals that were presented to us. They're worth $6,000. And I looked all over the country to try and find them, and finally somebody found us a set. You usually have to read it off of a little microfilm. And I thought maybe they'd, a few $100s and I could afford it, but $6,000, I said to the man, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I couldn't possibly handle that. Well, he said, that's the price, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry too, but we'll read the microfilm. And pretty soon he came back and he said, when the people that have it found out that it was for the Freeman Institute, they're giving it to you. But I want my brokerage fee, and that's $600. So I said, well, I take that out of the family savings. I can afford that. All right. April the 30th, George Washington was inaugurated in the Senate chamber of the Federal Hall in New York City. And he had to borrow money to make the trip from Virginia. Now, you see, we just don't think of this very often. And, of course, they had a lovely inaugural ball after his inauguration. It was a very lovely affair. And September the 11th, President Washington appointed Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton was made the Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton. And then General Henry Knox, that great 300-pounder in charge of artillery during the Revolutionary War, was made Secretary of War. I was glad of that. I always liked Henry Knox. And September the 24th, the federal court system was set up. Now today we have a beautiful Supreme Court building, but in those days it was just a humble little room. And when they set up the U.S. Capitol, it was just a single little room. All right, then Chief Justice John Jay was appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court on September the 26th. And Edmund Randolph, former governor of Virginia, he was made the Attorney General. Now on the screen you see John Jay. And then Edmund Randolph became the Attorney General. On September the 26th, Thomas Jefferson, who had come back from France, was made the Secretary of State. Secretary of State. Then on September the 29th, the United States Army was created. I like that. The U.S. Army was created. Total personnel, 1,000. 1,000. I like that. On September the 25th, Congress sent 12 amendments to the states for ratification, and 10 passed, as I've mentioned to you. Now we're ready to examine the Constitution phrase by phrase, and this great American Charter of Liberty now became not only the hope for us, but for the whole world. Now you'll remember that the Committee on Detail had turned over to the Committee on Style their ideas of what the Constitution would be. And when Governor Morris saw their preamble, oh, he said, that's awful. That won't sell the people. Listen to what the Committee on Detail had written. We, the people of the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Providence, Plantation, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, do ordain, declare, and establish the following Constitution of the government of ourselves and our posterity. Governor Morris tore that apart. He said, you don't know which states are going to ratify it. And that's your blank. You don't know who's going to ratify. You can't start listing the states. And what about when we get new states? You're going to have to list all of them too. Imagine saying the preamble today with 50 states. And furthermore, he says that doesn't sell anybody anything. People aren't going to be reading the whole Constitution. They're going to read the preamble to see what it's about, and that'll be the end of it. So you got to sell the thing there. Well, he was wrong on that score. I'll tell you, Americans got so excited about this controversial document, they did read it. Now, Gouverneur Morris set forth the 6 main purposes of good government for the first time in political history. And he set it down as follows. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. See, here was New England seceding from the Union. Seceding. And so he said, this is designed to bring us all together, that we'll have a greater union. And we're going to establish justice. Now that's really the only purpose that a government has to exist, is to protect your inalienable rights, to detect those who have offended your rights, to provide for reparation of the wrongs. Justice is the very foundation of the existence of a government. And we've kind of strayed from that concept today. To ensure domestic tranquility. Tranquility. Well, that of course means peace at home, being able to sleep at night. You're not worried about mobs and riots. But during the 1960s, during one year, I think it was 67, we had over 100 American cities burning. Something wrong there. Never should have happened. Anyway, tranquility. Provide for the common defense. Provide for the common defense. And you don't have defense unless they are strong enough to deter any foreign predatory power from attacking because of the risk involved. That's the federal government's responsibility, defense. Promote the general welfare, meaning the welfare of the whole country, not of one group, this particular profession or that. And secure the blessings of liberty. That's what it's all about. This land has been redeemed by the shedding of blood, and we shouldn't have to do it again. This liberty should be preserved for ourselves and our posterity. We there do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Well, the genius of the preamble becomes apparent if you ask yourselves, should any of these 6 objectives or goals be deleted? And that's your blank. Anything there you want to wipe out? Let me ask you another question. You think there's any additional purpose that ought to be added? Ought to be added. Did Gouverneur Morris miss anything? And Gouverneur Morris was interesting. He was 36 years old. He's a bachelor. A bit of a dresser. He had lace cuffs and a French cravat. A bit of a stylish, but he was a great fellow. Had a wooden leg. When the others would applaud, he'd thump. Now, at the beginning now of the last part of our lesson, as we continue our study, I'm going to teach you this entire preamble in Indian Sign Language so you'll never forget it, and you teach it to your children. Thank you.